Oh, sure. Like
Okay.
this here is one of those live CDs, which you can boot off of, installed to my hard disk, and it runs just like any other operating system.
You just changed which boot disk.
Absolutely. I've actually installed this on my hard disk, so I don't need to have a CD in the drive to make that happen.
Well, if you use the CD and you boot off the CD,
Yes.
will the operating system recognize your existing hard drive?
It depends upon how it's formatted. Without getting too much into the technical details of Windows, the older FAT file system is easily readable and writable by Linux. The newer NTFS file system is problematic to do writes, and frankly, I would not encourage people to try saving data.
You could corrupt your data if you start.
So if you're running Windows XP, that means you cannot write to the hard drive, but you can still read files.
You will be able to mount that hard disk and read files off of it, so you could take your data, but I would seriously not recommend at this time writing back to it. They're still working on that driver to make it read-write exceptionally reliable. Now, I've read and written from NTFS partitions and not had any problems with it. But for the general populace, I wouldn't want people to risk their data by doing that.
You'd be better off with having a little digital memory or something else you could plug in.
Yes, a USB stick or an external hard disk that you could save data to, something other than your main hard disk.
Now, I got a question.
Sure.
Where can I find, without giving me any particular companies, but just generally, how could I purchase a Linux system?
Purchase a computer with Linux, or
yeah,
just
purchase it pre-installed,
disk?
because I don't want to have to deal with figuring it out.
This is one of the problems with the Microsoft monopoly that we talked about before. Many manufacturers are not very willing to sell systems with Linux on them. At this time, if you go to Dell, you can get some Dells pre-configured with Linux. You can get Lenovo laptops pre-configured with Linux, with SUSE Linux, I believe. You can also, if you want a laptop, there's a company called System76.com that you can buy pre-configured laptops from them. And this is these are just examples. I'm not endorsing any of these companies.
Well, let's say if there's a website or someplace somebody could go where they could, let's say they were thinking of buying a certain system.
Yes.
Could they find out information about its compatibility with the versions of Linux?
Some manufacturers may provide that. I can't say I've seen it be very prevalent. The nice thing about these live CDs is if you walk into a store like a Best Buy, you say, okay, I don't really want to run Windows, but I'm just going to buy my computer locally. You can take one of those live CDs, stick it into one of those machines, see if everything works the way you like.
Right.
And then make your decision on buying your computer from that.
Because I imagine there's different chipsets, different configurations in computers that would make some computers more compatible than other computers.
Yeah, some things work better than others. It would be a good idea to check with your manufacturer and ask. And frankly, if you're planning on running Linux on your machine, and they say, we don't support Linux, we don't want anything to do with you, they're probably not the right people to buy from anyway. I'd look around, if you check some of the search engines and what have you, there are manufacturers that cater to people that want to use Linux, but because Microsoft puts restrictions on people, generally, unless they're big like a Dell or an IBM, Lenovo, if you want to sell Windows and Linux, you get a really lousy price on Windows. Or at least that's how they used to work. I don't know if they still get away with that, but they used to do it that way. So it's tough. You don't find a lot of people selling both, but that situation is improving over time.
I think actually all the major manufacturers are actually selling Linux on desktops and laptops now. HP,
Are they really?
Dell, Lenovo, which was IBM.
Yes.
They're all they either have desktop. They may not have both, but they have one or the either or both.
Yeah, be cautious about your pricing though, because a lot of them will charge more for a Linux system. You can very easily put Linux on it yourself. So what you can do is look at the system that they have configured with Linux, buy it without Linux, and put it on if they charge a premium for that.
You should get some kind of benefit for purchasing an operating system that was basically free.
Yes, you would think you should, but it doesn't always work out like that.
What about compatibility with size-wise? In terms of the operating system. Let's say if I had an older laptop, say if it had a 3 megabyte hard drive or something, say if it had processor speed of say 600 megahertz.
That's an excellent question. If you have older hardware, there are Linux distributions that have a less of a system requirement than the latest ones. If you get something like this really needs a beefier processor because it does all the flashy. You need a 3D accelerated video card to do stuff like this. But to do basic stuff, you don't need as much. And there are distributions that are tuned to run on less hardware. There's a version of one of the popular Linux distributions today is Ubuntu, Ubuntu. And there's a version of it that starts with an X. It's called Xubuntu, Xubuntu, that is specifically designed for lower speed machines with less system requirements. It requires less hard disk space and will run better on older machines. That's something you don't get out of a Windows XP or a Windows Vista. You pretty much have the system requirements and that's what it runs on. There are versions of this that people, because the source is open and because the architecture is open, they can scale it down so that it works better on older machines. I actually have a version of Xubuntu running on a laptop. It's a 300 megahertz machine with 128 megs of RAM. Is it a blazing fast machine? No. Nothing will ever make it a blazing fast machine, but it's perfectly acceptable to use that machine the way it is, and that machine is well below the requirements that will make an acceptable Windows machine.
For specific duty, that might be very,
Absolutely.
you could take hardware and get more years out of it.
For web and email, it works fantastic. It works with all the newest web standards.
Well, and theoretically, having an operating system, too, that you could actually run off of a disk.
Absolutely.
If you had a CD disk on an older hard drive, you could essentially dedicate your hard drive for storage, and have your operating system, not be consuming system resources in that sense.
Well, I typically wouldn't recommend that because running off the CD is usually considerably slower.
Right.
But some of these smaller operating systems, I mean, there are some like Puppy Linux which take less than 100 megs out of a 300 megabyte hard disk. That still leaves you plenty of room for applications, or almost as much as you were going to have anyway.
And it's 100 times smaller than any Windows application.
Right. It's a lot smaller and a lot